Well, U.S. President Donald Trump and top military officials spoke at the White House today. They shared new details about the rescue of the F-15 crew members who were shot down over Iran. The pilot was rescued quickly, but the weapons officer had to hide in the mountains to avoid search parties looking to capture them.
The single most important contributor to a successful rescue operation is the spirit of attack inside the heart of that downed aviator. Their will to survive, their will to evade, their will to recover is everything.
For more on this and the next stage, of course, of this conflict, I now want to bring in former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot Willard Shepard to our program here. He's a Gulf War veteran, an aviation attorney, and former broadcast journalist. Willard, it's a real pleasure to have you here on CBC News Network. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, I appreciate you having me, and we are all, of course, celebrating this tremendous military operation that got both of our airmen back.
Talk to me a little bit more about that, the process of getting them out, but also, I mean, this second crewman was in grave danger, having to hide, we understand, in mountainous regions to avoid being captured. Talk to me about, I guess, part of that mentality of that survival.
Well, first of all, as you can imagine, anyone and those of us who've flown fighter aircraft in our military services, and I had the honor to fly with Canadian F-18 pilots as well, is that anyone who's placed in this position obviously has a type A personality, is the person that believes in themselves and that they can overcome no matter what the circumstances are. Otherwise, our governments would not have given us this type of responsibility. So that having been said, and these are all very highly classified things when these types of operations needed to be done, and much of the training. But in general terms, we receive a tremendous amount of training about ejecting from the airplane, the types of things that would happen if you had to eject over enemy territory, a way to be able to escape and evade, as you heard the president and the general talk about earlier during the course of the day. But at the bottom line, a person inside them needs the courage, the will, the determination to overcome no matter what obstacles are in the way, including injury. And we know that this airman that was the weapons system officer, this colonel, did suffer some injuries and had to also take all of that into account about what his mobility was, the best way to be able to escape and evade, and to be able to get to a location, A, where it was safe for him to, in essence, hunker down, but B, where he could communicate, and C, where our forces could go in there and actually extract him. So that was what was accomplished here, a tremendous feat on the end of what our airmen did, but also all of the forces that went in there to be able to do this. The aircraft I flew, A-10s, was part of this operation to go in essence, keep the Iranian National Guard and any of the other forces away so that the operators on the ground could actually go get him, fly him out.
Having someone, not willingly, but someone on the ground here, and as you pointed out, quite heroically, he was able to tend to his wounds. He was able to sort of get himself into an area where he could be rescued. But I guess in some sense, he would have a level of intel in terms of what he is observing in terms, the terrain, et cetera, what he's hiding from, but what is surrounding him. What happens now, aside from, of course, the medical attention that he is going to need, but will there be a level of debrief? Will there be information he'll be able to relay now to his superiors on what he may have observed during this time while he was on the ground?
Yes, well, there are some automatic communication methods that we have in our aircrew kits, but also at some point, verbal communication can play a role here as to how to be able to actually help those people in terms of describing locations, where you are. Fortunately, this was a remote, relatively mountainous area. By climbing up to a higher altitude, up to about 7,000 feet in this area, It could aid with line of sight communications and those types of things. And it would provide some cover for him to be able to look out, see people that may have been coming up from down below, and those types of things, because this was not in an urban environment, but a much more rural, agricultural, mountainous type environment. And that provided some aid and cover for him while he was moving away from the aircraft, because that's the first thing that you obviously want to be able to do,
Right.
is get away from the wreckage site and then move to what you believe would be a safe location.
Lieutenant Shepard, what is your take then on how the mission has been unfolding and where the president has been alluding to where it could eventually go?
Well, clearly the fact that we simply had this air crew shot down, and then after that, as part of the rescue mission, one of the A-10s that I used to fly also was hit by the gunfire there. That pilot was able to get back over to Kuwaiti airspace, determined couldn't safely land the airplane and ejected. So that simply tells you we've moved into a phase of the conflict now. While we may have taken down many of the most sophisticated type of air defenses that the Iranians have, they have many other types of things that are basically very simple shoulder-fired missiles that they could have in large quantities and simply gunfire from the ground. And more of these missions are coming closer to the ground. So that places our air crews in greater danger, in the sense that while we may have overall general air superiority, it is still a very dangerous environment out there because of these shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missiles that, while much simpler than a radar-fired missile, it still can do harm, as we have seen. And it's very, very difficult to be able to try to track the volume of the types of weapons that are still out there of this type of variety.
We're going to be following things very closely as things continue to unfold, but really appreciate your time, Lieutenant Colonel Shepard, former U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and Gulf War veteran William Shepard, for us in Miami. Thank you again.
Thank you.